the subject of our next few lectures.
These lectures are titled Biology and Human Behavior, the Neurological Origins of Individuality, Part 2. Lecture 13, What do genes do? Microevolution of genes.
Welcome back. I hope you are energized and ready to take particularly good notes, because everything I'm going to tell you in this lecture is wrong. Well, actually, only some of it is wrong, but parts are true, and I got to tell you the wrong parts in the next lecture when you get to see what's actually going on. But all of this is a transition from what we've learned so far. Okay, what have we done? We have seen how the brain works from a single cell level and how it creates behavior. And then in the last 3 lectures, we transitioned to looking at where did this brain come from? Where did this brain come from? Our new bucket, our new category, and how does evolution sculpt the brain? And as we've just been hearing this hint, what's the intervening step in there? How does evolution, by way of changes in genes,
in 1 mile, keep left.
And at the beginning of that evolution stretch, 3 lectures ago, we went through what seemed like a totally straightforward series of steps. Okay, how did the giraffe get its long neck? Number 1, neck length has to have some sort of genetic component. Number 2, there's got to be variation in that genetic component from one individual to the next, and then there has to be selection of better versions of that genetic component. The individual bearing that passes on more copies of their genes, blah, blah. And from that, we did the very easy jump to the evolution of optimal behavior. As long as there is some genetic component to behavior variability, off you go, very simple. But it's at this point that all sorts of people take very, very strong criticism of that assumption in there. What do genes have to do with behavior? What's that assumption about there's a gene for anything, or there's even a genetic influence for? And this is wildly controversial. And there's whole realms of science where people are identifying all sorts of genes for certain behaviors. This was summarized
in 1 3/4 miles, keep left.
I saw recently. It shows these 2 scientists in the lab bench here, stereotypical scientists in their lab coats and futzing around with their test tubes or whatever. And one of them was turning to the other saying, you know how you're on the phone with somebody and you've been on for a long time, and finally they say, well, I should let you go, even though you haven't said anything. You know, really, they actually want to get off the phone, but they don't really want to say that. I think I found the gene for that. And that kind of summarizes that whole approach, the gene for. And before we get into the question that will dominate some coming lectures, which is what exactly my genes have to do with behavior, we have to suddenly stop and in a different disciplines bucket ask, what are genes anyway? How do they evolve? And what are genes? What are these things that are the intervening step in evolution and behavior that comes out the other end? And what we'll see initially is genes seem to have absolutely nothing to do with behavior. There are these sort of molecular little steps there, and we need to see that in order to begin to appreciate how they evolve and how they can evolve in ways relevant to